In 1944, during the final months of Nazi occupation in France, Pierre Dubois, a 15-year-old boy from the small town of Beaumont-sur-Oise, lives through the war's final days trying to help his mother Marie keep the family bakery running while his father fights with the resistance. With the natural curiosity of adolescence and the desperation of an occupied France, Pierre has taken to exploring the forests around town in search of supplies and escape routes. What he didn't expect was to literally stumble upon a camouflaged entrance leading to a German underground complex hastily abandoned, a bunker that served as a medical research center under the command of Dr. Klaus Richter. Among scattered documents, sinister medical equipment, and evidence of experiments, Pierre will discover secrets that the Nazi regime desperately tried to hide from history. But the truly traumatic discovery won't be the horrors of the past, but finding Sophie Laurent, a girl his age held prisoner for months, a survivor of the latest experiments, whose mental and physical condition will reveal to Pierre the limits of human cruelty. Between the duty to help and the terror of the unknown, a teenager will be forced to mature brutally, carrying secrets that will change not only his life, but his understanding of what it means to be human.
The smell of mold and rusted metal wakes me in panic some night.
40 years have passed since that October day in 1944, but my body still trembles when I remember the echo of my own footsteps descending those concrete stairs. Sometimes I wonder if I should have simply turned around, covered the entrance again with branches and leaves, and pretended I had never found anything. But at 15, curiosity weighs more than fear. And some discoveries, once made, cannot be undone. Beaumont-sur-Oise was a town too small to be important and too large to be ignored. We existed suspended between irrelevance and danger, watching German soldiers pass through our streets like uniformed ghosts. My mother made bread with flour we got on the black market, and I pretended to study Latin while actually memorizing escape routes through the forest. Papa was with the Maquisards somewhere in the mountains, at least that's what we hoped. War had a strange way of aging people. I felt closer to 30 than 15, carrying responsibilities I couldn't name. Maman depended on me to fetch firewood, to trade favors with neighbors, to be the eyes and ears she couldn't be. Pierre, you have young legs and an innocent face, she would say. Use that to our advantage. It was on one of those expeditions that it happened. I was looking for chestnuts in the woods behind the old church, in an area the Germans had abandoned a few weeks earlier. Autumn made the ground treacherous, covered with wet leaves that masked holes and roots. It was stumbling into one of those natural traps that my right foot broke through what seemed to be solid ground. The rotten wood gave way with a dull crack, revealing something that definitely wasn't natural. I brushed away the leaves and branches with trembling hands, discovering a metal hatch painted moss green, almost perfectly camouflaged. The hinges were rusted, but still functional. The cold metal burned my fingers when I forced it open. What I saw first was darkness. A dense, almost solid darkness that seemed to move. The smell that rose from that hole was indescribable, a mixture of chemicals, dampness, and something my young nose couldn't identify, but that my stomach immediately rejected. I vomited right there in the leaves, holding the hatch open with one hand while my body convulsed. But curiosity was stronger than nausea. I went back home, got the kerosene lantern that Maman kept for emergencies, and returned before nightfall. I didn't tell her anything. How could I?
Modeur, he found a secret entrance in the forest.
It would sound like a boy's fantasy, and we didn't have time for fantasies. The concrete staircase descended more than 3 meters. Each step echoed like a gunshot, making me stop and listen for voices, footsteps, any sign that I wasn't alone. But there was only silence. A heavy, dense silence, as if the air itself was dead. The main corridor stretched for about 20 meters, flanked by numbered metal doors. The weak light from my lantern created dancing shadows on the concrete walls, and I walked as if I were on sacred or cursed ground. The floor was covered with scattered papers, some in German, others with symbols and diagrams I couldn't decipher. The first door was ajar. I pushed it slowly, and the light revealed what appeared to be a medical office. But there was something wrong with that room. The examination table had leather straps on the edges. Medical instruments that looked more like torture tools were scattered on a metal tray. And on the walls, photographs. Dozens of them. Bodies.
Face.
Children. My hand began to tremble so much I almost dropped the lantern. I forced myself to breathe slowly, counting to 10 between each breath, like Maman taught me when I had nightmares. But this wasn't a nightmare. It was real, documented, systematized. I passed 3 more similar rooms before reaching the end of the corridor. The last door was closed but not locked. The handle turned with an almost inaudible click. And it was there that my world changed forever. She was huddled in the corner, hugging her knees to her chest. A girl my age, maybe a little younger, with blonde hair so dirty it looked brown. She was wearing what remained of a blue dress, torn and stained. When the lantern light hit her, she looked up, and I saw the purest fear that exists in the world. "Don't hurt me," she whispered in French, with an accent I couldn't identify.
Please, don't hurt me.
My heart was beating so hard I thought she could hear it. I set the lantern on the floor, very slowly, and crouched down to her level. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm.
My name is Pierre. What is your name?
She studied me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether I was real or another hallucination. Her eyes were blue, but there was a depth in them that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "Sophie," she said finally.
Sophie Laurent.
"What are you doing here, Sophie?" The question came out before I could think about whether I really wanted to know the answer. She closed her eyes and began rocking back and forth, a hypnotic and disturbing movement. "They brought me," she said. "A long time ago. They said I was special. That I would help science." Her words fell on me like cold stones. I looked around the small cell, because that's what it was, a cell, and saw more details that the darkness had hidden before.
A buquet in the corner. Dirty metal plate.
Marks on the walls, as if someone had tried to dig an exit with their fingernails.
How long have you been here?
"I don't know," she replied, and her voice was so small I had to lean in to hear.
The days blend together.
Sometimes it's dark, sometimes there's light. Sometimes they would come. Who? Who would come?
The doctor.
The man with glasses. They made me lie on the table and... Her voice failed, and she began to tremble. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I was 15 years old holding a lantern in a Nazi cell, talking to a girl who had been used for medical experiments. Nothing in my life had prepared me for that moment. "They're gone," I said.
The Germain.
"They left the town a few weeks ago." Sophie looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Hope? Terror? Or maybe just confusion. "What do you mean they're gone?"
The war is ending.
"The Allies are coming."
Beaumont-sur-Oise is free.
She remained silent for so long I began to think she had fainted with her eyes open. Then very slowly, she extended her right hand toward me. When the lantern light illuminated her fingers, I saw that 3 of them were missing.
Clean, precise, surgical scar.
I vomited again, right there on the cell floor. My stomach contracted violently, rejecting not just food, but the very reality of what I was seeing. Sophie didn't move, as if she was used to this reaction. "They wanted to see how long it took to heal," she said, as if commenting about the weather. "They would cut, weight, measure. Sometimes they injected things to see if it would heal faster." I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and forced myself to look at her again. "Sophie, I'm going to get you out of here." "Where to?" The question was simple, but the answer was impossible. Home? What home? To the hospital? How to explain where she had been? To the police? What police remained in a town that had been occupied for 4 years? "I don't know," I admitted. "But I can't leave you here." "Maybe it's better," she said.
You don't know how to be out there anymore.
Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. A girl my age, saying that maybe it was better to stay in an underground cell where she had been tortured for months, because she had forgotten how to live in the real world. I sat on the cold floor and tried to think. The lantern created a small circle of light around us, leaving the rest of the cell in darkness. Sophie had gone back to hugging her knees, rocking gently. I could hear her irregular breathing, interrupted by small sobs she tried to control. "Do you have family?" I asked. "I had," she replied.
In Lyon.
"But they took me one night. They said it was temporary, that I would return soon." "How long ago was that?"
You don't know.
"Time stopped down here." I watched her for a few minutes, trying to understand how someone survives this. How the human mind processes months of systematized torture. How a person maintains sanity when their own humanity is denied daily. "Sophie," I said finally, "I'm going to get help. There's a nurse in town, Madame Rousseau. She'll know what to do. Sophie looked at me with those blue eyes that seemed to have seen the end of the world. What if you don't come back? I will. What if they find me here when you bring other people? Who? Them. The Germans. What if they didn't really leave? The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but now that she mentioned it, fear settled in my chest like a stone. What if this was a trap? What if there were hidden guards waiting for someone to find Sophie? What if I had just signed our death warrant? Listen, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Do you know other exits from here? There's a door in the back, she said. But it's locked. Did you see them use it? Sometimes. When they brought other people. Other people. The phrase echoed in my head like a funeral bell. How many Sophies had passed through there? How many had left alive? I picked up the lantern and stood. I'm going to take a look at that door. You stay here. You won't go far? The vulnerability in her voice almost made me break down. No. I'll stay close. The back door was at the end of another corridor I hadn't explored before. It was heavier than the others, with multiple locks. But when I tested the handle, it turned freely. On the other side, a staircase led up to what appeared to be another camouflaged exit. I ran back to Sophie. I found an exit. Can you walk? She tried to stand, but her legs trembled and she fell back to the floor. Months of confinement, inadequate nutrition, and physical trauma had taken their toll. Can't you stand? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, she said. Depends on the day. I looked at her bare feet, at her legs that were too thin, at the dress that looked more like rags. How was I going to get her out of there? I can try, she said, as if she had read my thoughts. If you help me. I put my arm around her waist and helped her stand. Sophie was too light, almost ethereal. We managed to reach the back door, but climbing the stairs would be impossible in her condition. Wait here, I said. I'm going to see where this staircase leads, then I'll come back for you. Pierre. Yes. Thank you. 2 words. Simple as that. But loaded with a gratitude that made me understand, for the first time, the weight of saving a life. The staircase led to a camouflaged structure about 50 meters from the main entrance, hidden behind dense bushes. The sun was setting, tinting the forest golden. The contrast between the beauty of the sunset and the horror I had left down there was almost surreal. I went back for Sophie. This time, I carried her in my arms, one step at a time. She weighed almost nothing, but my 15-year-old muscles protested before we reached the top. When we finally emerged into the open air, Sophie made a sound that took me a few seconds to recognize. She was crying. I didn't remember what it was like, she whispered. The wind. The smell of trees. We sat on a moss-covered rock, Sophie breathing the forest air as if it were water after months in the desert. I looked at her and tried to process what had happened. A few hours ago, I was just a 15-year-old boy looking for chestnuts. Now I was responsible for a survivor of Nazi experiments who could barely walk. What do we do now? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. I never thought about after. Do you want me to take you home? To Lyon? Sophie was quiet for so long, I thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost inaudible. I don't know if I still have a home. And even if I do, I don't know if I could explain where I've been. What they did to me. I understood what she meant. How do you return to a normal life after something like this? How do you sit at the dinner table with your family and pretend everything is okay? How do you sleep at night knowing there are people in the world capable of doing what they did to you? You can stay with us, I said impulsively. My mother would understand. Sophie looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. You would do that? Even knowing what I am now. What are you? Broken. Damaged. No good for anything anymore. The way she said it, so casual, so accepted, made me realize that the Nazis had achieved something worse than physical torture. They had convinced a 15-year-old girl that she no longer had value as a person. You're not broken, I said, and my voice came out stronger than expected. You survived. That's what you are. A survivor. Sophie looked me in the eyes for the first time since I found her. How can you be so sure? Because if you were really broken, you wouldn't have thanked me when I said I would help you. Broken people don't feel gratitude. We walked slowly through the forest toward town, Sophie leaning on my arm. With each step, I felt the weight of the responsibility I had assumed. It wasn't just about getting her out of that bunker. It was about helping her remember how to be human again. When we reached the outskirts of Beaumont-sur-Oise, curfew was already near. The streets were deserted, only the distant echo of some radio playing music that seemed to come from another world. "Maman," I called softly when we entered through the back door of the bakery. "I need to talk to you." Marie Dubois appeared in the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron. When she saw Sophie, her eyes widened. Not with fear or disgust, but with the kind of instant understanding that only mothers possess.
Mon Dieu, she whispered.
What did they do to this child? I didn't need to explain much. Maman took one look at Sophie, at her mutilated fingers, at her ragged clothes, at the terror still visible in her eyes, and understood everything. Or at least enough. "Pierre, go get hot water," she said, already guiding Sophie to a chair. "And get your father's clean robe." I spent the rest of the night watching my mother care for Sophie with the delicacy of someone handling broken crystal. She didn't ask questions about the bunker, about the experiments, about anything that might force Sophie to relive those moments. She simply fed her, dressed her, and prepared a bed in the small back room where we stored flour. "Is she going to stay?" I asked when we finally sat at the kitchen table, Sophie sleeping in the next room. "For as long as she needs," Maman replied. "But Pierre, do you understand what this means?" "Not exactly. It means our life has changed. That we have responsibilities we didn't have yesterday. It means that girl will need years, maybe decades, to heal what they did to her. And it means we'll be here to help." I looked to the closed door of the room where Sophie slept, probably her first safe sleep in months. What if I hadn't found her? "But you did," Maman said, placing her hand over mine. "And now she's our responsibility. Our family." 3 days later, I found Sophie sitting in the small garden behind the bakery, looking at her own hands. The morning sun illuminated her scars, making them almost translucent. "Does it hurt?" I asked, sitting beside her. "Sometimes," she said. "More when it's going to rain. It's strange, feeling pain in fingers that don't exist anymore." "Sophie, do you remember how it was before?" She was quiet for a long moment, as if she were searching a distant part of her memory. "I like to play piano," she said finally. "My mother taught me when I was little. I wasn't very good, but I liked the feeling of the keys." We looked together at her mutilated hands. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything that couldn't be said. "Do you think I'll ever be able to forget?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Would you like to forget?" "Sometimes, yes. But other times I think it would be like betraying all the other people who went through that and didn't survive." Sophie was 15 years old and spoke about trauma and survival and guilt with a maturity that scared me. War had a cruel way of accelerating growth, but what happened to her went beyond forced maturity. It was wisdom born from pain. That afternoon, while helping Maman in the bakery, I heard Sophie screaming. I ran to the room and found her sitting on the bed, eyes wide, body trembling. "They were here," she said, grabbing my arm. "I saw the doctor. He was standing there at the door." "Sophie, there's no one here. It's just us." But I saw him. With the glasses and the white coat. I sat on the edge of the bed and held her hands. It was a dream. Or a memory. But he's not here. He'll never be here again. "How can you be sure?" It was a simple question that had no simple answer. How could I guarantee that the ghosts of her past wouldn't come back to haunt her? How could I promise she would be safe when I myself was just a boy who had stumbled upon a hatch by chance? "Because I'm going to protect you," I said, and for the first time since I found her, I really believed my own words. Sophie looked at me with those blue eyes that had seen too much for her age. "Why? Why do you care?" "Because someone has to care," I replied. "And because finding you made me understand that some things in the world are worth protecting." 6 months later, when Papa finally returned from the resistance, he found a different family from the one he had left. Sophie still woke up screaming some nights, still avoided mirrors and sharp objects, still spoke in whispers when she was nervous. But she also helped Maman in the bakery, read books voraciously as if trying to make up for lost time, and sometimes even smiled. Papa never asked where she had come from. He didn't need to. One look at her hands, at the way she shrank when strange men entered the bakery, at how she checked all the doors before sleeping, and he understood enough. "The bunker," he said to me one night, when we were walking through the forest. "Did you close it?" I dynamited the entrance a few days after finding Sophie.
With explosive die borrowed from the maquisard. And the document? The evidence.
I burned everything. I didn't want anything of that to remain. Papa nodded with approval. Sometimes it's better that certain things are forgotten. But what about the other victims? The families who never knew what happened.
You saved who you could save, Pierre.
You can't carry the weight of everyone you couldn't save. But I did carry it. For years, I woke up thinking about the other cells I didn't explore, the other names that might have been written in those documents, the families still waiting for news of children who would never return. The weight of survivors' guilt wasn't just Sophie's. It was mine too. Sophie stayed with us for 2 years. Slowly, very slowly, she remembered how to be a 15, then 16, then 17-year-old girl. She learned to laugh again, although never with the spontaneity of someone who hadn't been through that. She made friends with some girls in town, although she never told her real story. To the outside world, she was a refugee from Lyon who had lost her family in the bombings. A sad story, but understandable. A necessary lie to protect her privacy and sanity. In the summer of 1946, she came to me one morning and said she was ready to move on. Move on where? I asked.
Paris.
I want to study medicine. Medicine. I want to understand what they did to me. And I want to help other people who went through similar things. The irony wasn't lost on me. The girl who had been a victim of Nazi medical experiments wanted to become a doctor. But there was an iron logic to it. Who better to heal wounds than someone who knew intimately how they were caused? On the eve of her departure for Paris, Sophie and I walked to the clearing where I had found the bunker entrance. Nothing remained but a mound of earth and some stones. Nature was slowly reclaiming the space. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Finding me? Your life would have been simpler if you had never stumbled upon that hatch." I thought about it. About the sleepless nights when she screamed with nightmares. About the constant responsibility of caring for someone so damaged. About how my adolescence had ended abruptly the moment I descended those concrete stairs. "No," I said, and it was the most honest truth I had ever spoken. My life would have been simpler, but it wouldn't have been better. Sophie smiled, one of the first genuine smiles I had seen from her. "You saved my life, Pierre. Not just by getting me out of that place. You helped me remember that I was still human." "You saved mine too," I replied. "You taught me that sometimes the most important choices are the ones we make without thinking, and that some responsibilities are worth carrying." Today, 40 years later, Sophie is a renowned psychiatrist specializing in war trauma. She married a literature professor, had 2 children, lives a life anyone would call normal. We still write to each other, although we rarely talk about that winter in Beaumont-sur-Oise. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I were 15 again and knew everything that would follow. If I would know about the decades of nightmares, not just hers, but mine too. If I would know about the weight of carrying secrets I can't share with anyone except Maman and Papa. If I would know that some images, a girl huddled in a cell, mutilated fingers, pure terror in blue eyes, never leave the memory. Would I still make the same choice? Would I still descend those stairs? Would I still carry Sophie to the light? The answer is yes. Without hesitation, without doubt, without regret. Because at 15 I discovered that some discoveries, no matter how traumatic, define us in ways we never imagined. And I discovered that the real trauma isn't finding horror, it's choosing to look the other way when you have the power to do something about it. The bunker may have disappeared, but Sophie continues to live. And sometimes, on nights when the weight of memories becomes too heavy, that's enough.